Classical Conversations presents Refining Rhetoric with CEO Robert Bortons, a podcast where faith, business, politics, and classical education meet. Join us as we use the classical tools of rhetoric to seek truth in every arena of life.
Hey everybody, welcome back to another exciting episode of Refining Rhetoric. For those who aren't aware, we kind of took the month of July off from recording new episodes, and that could have been a mistake. We had so much going on. So Chris, what are some of the things that we missed that we want to catch up on today?
Since we last recorded, we've had we actually had a debate. They got to debate each other. We got to find out about Joe Biden's golf handicap. That was exciting. And then immediately after that, there was an assassination attempt on Donald Trump. And then we got to find out that Joe is dropping out of the race. And now we have a new presidential candidate. Kamala is taking his place. And then Weird Vance got picked for VP. So it has been story after story after story. Now the Olympics are going on. And you wrote a really cool article. I want you to speak to that. Go ahead and tell us what that was about.
Yeah, so like many of you, I was excited about watching the Olympics and getting primed up for it, watching the opening night. And, I start seeing on X all of these videos of the transgenderism and their recreation of the Last Supper. Of course, they later apologized for it and then later denied it was the Last Supper and claimed it was some Greek festival. Either way, not family friendly, not appropriate, entertainment for such a beautiful event. And, that's taking place in France. And it just kind of reminded me of this quote that Kamala Harris likes to say at almost every rally, where she says, "What can be unburdened by what has been." And that's really her worldview. And it's a very dangerous worldview. But I just immediately started seeing all over the place how this worldview is lived out. And so I wrote this op-ed in the Carolina Journal, which of course is linked to in the show notes, really pointing this out and all the ways that we're seeing just the mainstream media and the Democrat Party try to remake her.
So talk to me a little bit about this quote. I've heard multiple people mention this exact quote in reference to Kamala. What can be unburdened by what has been. This sounds like a Marxist maxim. I'm unfamiliar with the origin. Can you speak to that at all?
Yeah, so the Olympics are in France, and Karl Marx was actually reflecting on the French Revolution when he wrote the really words that this comes from. And it is the tradition of all dead generation weighs like a nightmare on the brains of the living. And obviously not a very modern day interpretation of that. People wouldn't like that. So it's been remade. I'm sure that this was taught to her by her dad, who was a Marxist. And it's this idea what can be, right? That the traditions of our past are burdensome to us. And so what can be, we got to throw off those traditions that things like the Second Amendment we don't need to be burdened by that. We can do mandatory gun buyback programs. And of course, we just saw the Venezuela election, and even the Democrats in the U.S. are saying that it was very fraudulent. And then the Venezuela government is literally going to the streets and killing its opposition. But what can be unburdened by what has been.
So talk to me about this frame of mind of unburdening ourselves with the past and how we should cast off tradition and be free to think about things abstractly and what we're experiencing today, as long as we're remembering the histories and traditions of the oppressed peoples and the people that we want you to remember. Like, we should make sure that we're talking about Dionysus at the Olympic Games because it's important to their heritage, but Jesus is not. So talk to me about the breakdown that's occurring with this idea and where and why it's important to remember history versus when it is a hindrance, and what are they doing so wrong in this thinking?
Well, I think you got to compare it to what Isaac Newton said, which was if I have seen further, it is by standing on the backs of giants. And this idea is really, it's not so much just as a progressive view. Like both of these ideas are progressive. Let's go forward. Let's make things better, right? I mean, that's kind of, if you're taking what she's saying in a positive light that way, but it's really about unburdening what has been, right? They're trying to destroy the past. They're trying to remake history. It's, of course, bad things have happened in the past, and hopefully we learn from those and move on. But they're talking about unburdening everything, right? That's what the communists, that's what the Marxists do, is they try to destroy families, right? If you can distance a family from their country, where they don't have any shared heritage with their neighbors, where they don't have a worldview similar to their neighbors. Yeah, we can have disagreements about where we want to go or how we get there, but hey, we all want America to be great. Well, that should be something every American wants because we live here. Well, we have this idea of we need to unburden ourselves from our past so that we can move forward. And that's, of course, things like this, like I mentioned earlier, the Second Amendment, things like men and women being two different genders, things like Kamala Harris's own past, where she was called the most left-wing senator in the country. And now, 5 years later, GovTrack is going back and editing news articles that called her that and said, oh, well, now 5 years down the road, we've changed our mind, and she's actually very center. And things like Axios, who called her the border czar. And we've seen, like 11 or 12 million people cross over our border while she was in charge of fixing it. Now they're saying, oh, well, she was actually the border czar. It's like, well, you called her that multiple times. Everybody called her that. So now you're saying that wasn't true. Now that is inconvenient for her future ambition. She said that American citizens and the American taxpayer should pay for 100% of illegal immigrants' healthcare costs. Well, we're $35 trillion in debt as a country. They're going to have to raise taxes or inflation. How are we going to pay for this? These are things that Kamala Harris has to be unburdened by. And so what can be her being president, they have to unburden her from her past. And George Orwell said, who controls the past, ran the party slogan, controls the future. Who controls the present, controls the past. And we're literally seeing this in front of our eyes happening as news articles are updated from 3 and 5 years ago, that things she said are being scrubbed from the internet.
Yeah, that's what's important to remember about this. They're not just writing new articles and saying, hey, we've taken a second look at Kamala. Turns out we were maybe a little, no, they're actually going back and changing the metadata. They're retroactively trying to change what exists in history. And so you're sort of answering the question that I had following up the earlier one about exactly what this Marxist idea is of unburdening ourselves from the past. Because again, it doesn't feel like that's what the party's trying to do. If anything, I feel like they're saying we need to make reparations. We need to remember our past and all of the evils that have been committed and try to fix them. And so there's these two sides of it where we're only allowed to remember the evils if we are not oppressed. And if we are oppressed, it is very important to remember our heritage and remember how we need to be elevated back up to where we ought to have been to begin with. It's there's a term for this, but what I see happening and what you're talking about is sort of trying to pull this idea out across a variety of different areas and say, let's just change when it's helpful, when it's useful, when it's applicable to whatever I want. That's when we'll get rid of the past.
Yeah, absolutely. That they're saying that these ideas that glue us and knit us together needs to be removed, and that we just need to totally remake our society, that we're all racist, that America's a racist country, and all of these ideas, anything that they don't like needs to be unburdened. If there's an amendment they don't like or anything like that. But it doesn't even play out like that for their followers. I mean, think about like Title IX, which is supposed to give equal access to federal funding to both men and women. Well, now they have used it. Kamala Harris and Joe Biden are now using Title IX to force institutions to allow men to use women's bathrooms, for men to compete in women's sports. There are, I believe, 2 male boxers competing at the Olympics in France that are competing in the women's sport, and they are just destroying these girls, just beating them up. I know one of the girls just dropped out like 45 seconds into the boxing match. I mean, they're just getting their faces destroyed. But hey, we're unburdened by the past, men and women being separate. So what can be that we can have gender fluidity, that men can define themselves as a woman or a cat or whatever they want to define themselves. And a woman can, define herself as if she wanted to, that we can get rid of these oppressive male, female, patriarchy, matriarchal heritage, and just do whatever we want to be happy. And now if you aren't going to be doing what they believe the future should look like, well, they're going to cut off your funding. And so these ideas like these bills, Fairness in Women's Sports Acts, Parents' Bill of Rights, minors shouldn't be chemically castrated. All of these things that have kind of the shared history in our country are a burden to the worldview that they want to implement. And so all of these things are being opposed by the Democrat Party because that's not the world that they want to live in. They don't want to live in a world where we have traditions, where we have strong families, where we have strong communities, because in those worlds, those people are not dependent on government handouts. Those people aren't dependent on a strong centralized government. And since that's what they want the power, they want the control, we have to unburden ourselves from these inconveniences so that we can have a future where the government is taking care of us all the time. And so Kamala Harris, if you look at her history, is a person who didn't even make the first Democrat primary. She dropped out. She has a history of incarcerating people over minor offenses and letting people with major offenses go. She was the most radical left-wing senator. She has failed at every job the Biden administration has given her. So just like when Karl Marx was looking at France and saying that they needed to unburden themselves for what could be, Kamala Harris and the media and the Democrat Party are trying to recreate herself anew. So what can be, the first Black Indian president, female, she has told us that her pronouns are she and her, as well as the color of the outfit she was wearing in one video, versus this past of, racism and sexism in the highest office in the land. So that's what they're trying to do. And we need to, as classicalists and as Christians, understand what they're saying and the ultimate outcomes of this. And of course, we know that the ideas that Marxism or Karl Marx has, that has been played out through Marxism and communism, has killed tens of millions of people, has caused genocides, has all of these evil things associated with them. But we do not want to be burdened by communism because it wasn't properly implemented the first time, right? What can be,
or the third,
what can be is Kamala Harris implementing it properly this time in the United States. And that's ultimately what they want. We are going to have a very interesting fall election season. Obviously, the polls are tightening. There's momentum. So it'll be interesting to follow what's going on there. But just remember that as Christians living in a republic, it's our responsibility to educate ourselves on policies. We don't have two perfect candidates. A lot of people don't like either of the candidates, but ultimately they do have two different worldviews. They are trying to implement in the United States we have to decide for ourselves which align closest to our Christian view of the world. And so continue to listen to our podcast. We'll keep on interviewing interesting people. And of course, we'll talk about current events and homeschooling and everything going on in the future. So until next time, God bless. Share this episode with a friend, and be sure to subscribe if you haven't. Hey everyone, I want to briefly interrupt this program to tell you about one of our newest Copper Lodge Library releases, Pride and Prejudice. It is a resource that our families read in the Challenge program. Our Classical Conversations multimedia company has produced this new Copper Lodge edition of this beloved, beautiful book that so many of us love and enjoy. Me not being one of those as a teenage male, not my favorite one that my mom required me to read, but as an adult, I definitely appreciate the story much more. And it's a beloved classic novel. And the wonderful thing about the Copper Lodge Library books is it has footnotes that include, definitions, pronunciations, historical context, and really just helps bring the story to life, as well as wide margins so that students can take notes and really have that conversation with the author. And I bet I would have enjoyed these books much more as a teenage male had I had these details provided for me in the books that I was reading. So students will be discussing Pride and Prejudice inside of our Classical Conversations communities. And of course, for those who might not be in CC, it's a wonderful book that you should include in every curriculum. So you can learn more about the Copper Lodge Library series at copperlodgelibrary.com and go to classicalconversationsbooks.com to purchase one today. Now back to the show.
Welcome to Classical Crypto with Will today. It is so great to be with you. I want to talk a little bit about the Bitcoin price today and why we might not be seeing more price appreciation, because we are past the halvening. And we talk about this a lot. And it is true, like when you're in a bull run, which we are now in, it takes months after the halving sometimes for the price to start really appreciating. But still, those who are coming into the market who thought the halving was the catalyst for exponential growth and they're not seeing it, I know those people are mad, they're fearful, they have doubt, and now a lot of them are exiting the markets. But what is behind the scenes right now, or at least in the month of June? What was holding that price back? And there are two things that have started coming out. The first was a story from Germany. So in 2013, the German government confiscated 50,000 Bitcoin from a business that was corrupt, basically, is what it came down to. And they've been holding on to all of that Bitcoin. And for the first time ever, they saw a stable price at above $60,000. And there could be, something that's more like behind the scenes that's manipulative. But it looks like they're just being silly. Instead of selling their Bitcoin over the counter, the German government started just dumping crypto onto the market here June 2024. And they did it in weird, strange ways. Like, they were public about it. They put it on major exchanges. They could have done it behind the scenes. They could have slowly sold off their Bitcoin online with bots, or sold over the counter where no one would hear about it. But they just started dumping. So the obvious consensus is that they were being silly. No one really knows what they're doing over there. They should be holding on to it or taking some profits privately. So it didn't make a lot of sense, but they sold about 900 Bitcoin in the month of June. Definitely that could have affected the price a little bit. Second is Mt. Gox. Now, Mt. Gox was a Japanese crypto exchange that operated from 2010 to 2014. 2014, there was a major hack. Now, in those 4 years when it ran, 70% of global Bitcoin transactions went through Mt. Gox as an exchange, which is just crazy. It was that big. And they had around 750,000 Bitcoin stolen from them. In today's money, that'd be around $45 billion that the hackers got in and took away. So 750,000 Bitcoin stolen, and then they were able to get back maybe 200,000 of that. So they got back roughly 33%. But now they've been paying back creditors year after year after year, and they do so, of course, in the bull market. So they're still selling, and when the price got about to $60,000, they were again selling to creditors to make up from that loss from 10 years ago. So absolute craziness. I wish we didn't have to live with companies currently now making up for mistakes of the past, but that's where we are, and that could be part of the reason why Bitcoin's price has been trading sideways, has stayed in the $60,000 range. But hey, we know the timing of when price should appreciate. If you're an investor, that's what you're looking for. And this is just more time to slowly dollar cost average into the markets. Not financial advice, but that's the way I'm looking at it. And get in there. So now you know a little bit more about Mt. Gox and what the German government did here June 2024.
Thank you for listening to Refining Rhetoric with Robert Bortons. Want more? Make sure to subscribe so you won't miss an episode. You can also follow us on social media to continue the conversation, and visit classicalconversations.com/rhetoric to find out how you can join a local homeschool community.